Hey guys, I wanted to start a new book with everybody. So, just in case you've never heard it before, my fifth grade teacher read it to me, Mrs. Reynolds, back in Tolman Elementary. Hi, Mrs. Reynolds. And I wanted to start reading it. It's a book called Jennifer, Hecate, Macbeth, William McKinley, and Me, Elizabeth. So, today I'm going to start reading that first chapter, and we'll start talking about this book a little bit more later on. But there is nothing on this one because it's such an old book. There's nothing on it to really share anything else with you. So, I'm just going to jump into the story. I will let you know, though, it is perfect for Halloween and like the kind of months that we're in right now, since we're in the month of October. So, chapter 1. I first met Jennifer on my way to school. It was Halloween, and she was sitting in a tree. I was going back to school for lunch. This particular lunch hour was only a little different from usual because of Halloween. We were told to dress in costume for a school Halloween parade. I was dressed as a pilgrim. I always walked the back road to school, and I always walked alone. We had moved to the apartment house in September, just before school started, and I walked alone because I didn't have anyone to walk with. I walked the back way because it passed through a little woods that I liked. Jennifer was sitting in one of the trees in this woods. Our apartment house had grown on a farm about 10 years before. There was still a small farm across the street. It included a big white house, a green house, a caretaker's house, and a pump painted green without a handle. The greenhouse had clean windows. They shone in the sun. I could only see the roof windows from our second floor apartment. The rest were hidden by trees and shrubs. My mother never called the place a farm. She always called it the estate. That's in capital letters, by the way. It was old. The lady who'd owned it was old. She'd given part of her land to the town for a park, and the town named the park after her, Samuelson Park. The estate gave us a beautiful view from our apartment. My mother liked trees. Our new town was not full of apartments. Almost everyone else lived in houses. There were only 3 apartment buildings as big as ours. All 3 sat on top of a hill from the train station. Hundreds of men rode the train from New York City every morning and rode it home every night. My father did. In the mornings, the elevators would be full of kids going to school and fathers going to the train. The kids left the building by the back door and ran down one side of the hill to school. The fathers left the building by the front door and ran down the other side of the hill to the station. Other kids from the apartment chose to walk to school through the little woods. The footsteps of all of them for 10 years had worn away the soil so that the roots of the trees were bare and made steps for walking up and down the steep slope. The little woods made better company than the sidewalks. I like the smell of trees and the colors of the trees. I like to walk with my head way up, practically hanging over the back of my neck. Then I could see the patterns of leaves formed against the blue sky. I had my head way back and was watching the leaves when I first saw Jennifer up in the tree. She was dressed as a pilgrim too. I saw her feet first. She was sitting on one of the lower branches of the tree, swinging her feet. That's how I happened to see her feet first. They were just about the boniest feet I have ever seen, swinging right there in front of my eyes as if I were sitting first row at the Cinerama. They wore real pilgrim shoes made of buckles and cracked old leather. The heel part flapped up and down because the shoes were so big that only the toe part could stay attached. Those shoes looked as if they were going to fall off any minute. And there is the picture, in case you're wondering. So there's that bony foot that she's about to push out. So. I grabbed the heel of the shoe and shoved it back onto the heel of that bony foot. Then I wiped my hands on my pilgrim apron and looked up at Jennifer. I didn't know yet that she was Jennifer. She was not smiling, and I was embarrassed. I said in a loud voice, which I hope would come out sounding stout red, but which came out sounding thin blue, "Gonna lose that shoe." The first thing Jennifer ever said to me was, "Witches never lose anything." "But you're not a witch," I said. "You're a pilgrim. Look, so am I." "I won't argue with you," she said. "Witches convinced they never argue. But I'll tell you this much. Real witches are pilgrims. And just because I don't have on a silly black costume, and just because I don't carry a silly broom and wear a silly black hat, doesn't mean I'm not a witch. I'm a witch all the time and not just on Halloween." I didn't know what to say, so I said what my mother always says when she can't answer one of my questions. I said, "You better hurry up now or you'll be late for school." "Witches are never late," she said. "But witches have to go to school," I said. I wish I'd thought of something clever. "I just go to school because I'm putting the teacher under a spell," she said. "Which teacher?" I asked. "Get it? Which teacher?" I laughed. I was pleased now that I had said something clever. Jennifer neither laughed nor answered, but I was sure she got it. She looked at me hard and said, "Give me those 3 chocolate chip cookies, and I'll come down and I'll tell you my name, and I'll walk the rest of the way to school with you." I wasn't particularly hungry for the cookies, but I was hungry for company. So I said, okay, and reached my hand out holding the cookies. I wonder how she could tell the chocolate chips. They were in a bag. As she began to swing down from the branches, I caught a glimpse of her underwear. I expected that it would look dusty, and it did. But that wasn't why it was not like any underwear that I'd ever seen. Yards and yards of petticoats. Her pilgrim dress looked older than mine. Much older. Much, much older. Hers looked ancient. Of course, my pilgrim costume was not new either. I had worn it the year before, but then I'd been in a different grade in a different school. My cousin had worn the costume before that. I hadn't grown much during the year. My dress was only a little short and only a little tight and only a little scratchy where it was pinned, and it was only absolutely uncomfortable. In other words, my costume was a hand-me-down, but Jennifer was a genuine antique. After Jennifer touched the ground, I saw that she was taller than I. Everybody was. I was the shortest kid in my class. I was always the shortest kid in my class. She's thin. Skinny is what she really was. She came toward my hand, and she looked hard at the bag of cookies. You sure you didn't bite any of them? She said. She demanded. Sure, I'm sure, I said. I was getting mad, but a bargain's a bargain. Well, she said, taking one cookie out of the bag. My name's Jennifer. Now let's get going. As she said going, she grabbed the bag with the other two cookies and started to walk. Wait up, I yelled. A bargain's a bargain. Don't you want to know my name? I told you witches are never late, but I can't be responsible for you yet. Elizabeth. She knew my name already. She walked so fast I was almost convinced she was a witch. She was practically flying. We got to school just as the tardy bell began to ring. Jennifer's room was a fifth grade just off the corridor near the entrance, and she slipped into her classroom while the bell was still buzzing. My room was 4 doors further down the hall, and I got to my room after the bell had stopped. She said that witches are never late. Being late felt as uncomfortable as my tight pilgrim dress. No pilgrim had ever suffered as much as I did. Walking to my seat while everyone stared at me was awful. My desk was in the back of the room. It was a long, long walk. The whole class had time to see that I was a blushing pilgrim. The whole class didn't have to know that too. Sorry, I was ready to cry. I knew I was ready to cry. The whole class didn't have to know that too, so I didn't raise my eyes until I was seated and felt sure they wouldn't leak. When I looked up, I saw there were 6 pilgrims, 3 other pilgrim girls, and 2 pilgrim boys. That's a lot of pilgrims for a class of 20. But none of them could be witches, I thought. After checking their costumes and shoes, I decided that at least 3 of them had cousins who'd been pilgrims the year before too. Miss Hazen announced that she would postpone my detention until the next day because of the Halloween parade. Detention was a school rule. If you were late coming to school, you stayed after school that day. The kids called it staying after. I didn't feel grateful for the postponement. She could have just skipped my staying after altogether. Our lesson afternoon was short, and I didn't perform too well. I had to tuck on my dress a lot and scratch under my pilgrim hat a lot. I would have scratched other places where the costume itched, but they weren't polite. At last, we were all lined up in the hall. Each class was to march to the auditorium and be seated. Then one class at a time would walk across the stage before the judges. The rest of the classes would be the audience. The classes at the end of the hall marched to the auditorium first. Now, what I didn't mention is this book took place a lot longer ago, probably more around the 60s. So not all schools have like a Halloween parade anymore, but this school most certainly does, and it would be one where you get judged. So if you use a picture right here, you can see everybody standing there. And so these are the kids in the hall. Elizabeth is right there. She's actually the one in the fourth one back. And then the 2 girls we're about to be talking about very, very soon are right there in the front. So there were classes on both sides of the hall near my room, and the space for marchers was narrow. Some of the children had cardboard cartons over them and were supposed to be packages of cigarettes or sports cars. These costumes had trouble getting through. Then there was Jennifer. She was last in line. She neither looked right nor to the left, but slightly up toward the ceiling. I kept my eye on her, hoping she'd say hi so I wouldn't feel so alone standing there. She didn't. Instead, well, I almost didn't believe what I actually saw her do. But before I tell you what I saw her do, I have to tell you about Cynthia. Every grown-up in the whole US of A thinks Cynthia is perfect. She is pretty and smart and neat. I guess that makes almost perfect to any other grown-up. Since she lives in the same apartment house we do, and since my mother is a grown-up, and since my mother thinks that she is perfect, my mother has tried hard to have us become friends since we first moved to town. My mother would drop hints. Hint, why don't you call Cynthia and ask her if she'd like to show you where the library is? Then you can both eat lunch here. Or hint, why don't you run over and play with Cynthia while I unpack the groceries? It didn't take me long to discover what Cynthia was not perfect. The word for what Cynthia was mean. Here's an example of mean. There's a little boy in our building who had moved in about a month before we did. His name was Johann. That's German for John. He moved from Germany and didn't speak English yet. He loved Cynthia because she was so pretty, I guess. He followed her around and said, Cynthia, Cynthia. Cynthia always made fun of him. She would stick her tongue between her teeth and say, my name is Cynthia, not Cynthia. Johann would smile and say, Cynthia. Cynthia would stick out her tongue and say, and then she'd walk away from him. I liked Johann. I wish he'd follow me around. I would have taught him English, and I wouldn't even have minded if he called me Elizabeth. Another word for what Cynthia was two-faced, because every time some grown-up was around, she was sweet to Johann. She'd smile and pat his head, only until the grown-up left. And another thing, Cynthia certainly didn't need me for a friend. She had a very good friend called Dolores, who also lived in the apartment house. They told secrets and giggled together whenever I got in the elevator with them. So I got in the habit of leaving for school before they did. Sometimes on weekends, they'd be in the elevator when I got on. I'd act as if they weren't there. I had to get off the elevator before they did because I lived on the 2nd floor and they lived on the 6th. Before I would get off the elevator, I'd take my fist, fast and furious, and I'd push every button just a second before I got out. I'd step out of the elevator and watch the dial stopping at every floor on the way up. Then I'd skip home to our apartment. So she basically made it so that they have to stop on each floor. If you push the button to go to the floor you want to, then you don't have to worry about stopping on any of the other floors. So she just made it even more difficult for them. For Halloween, Cynthia wore everything real ballerinas wore. Leotards and tights and ballet slippers and a tutu. A tutu is a little short skirt that ballerinas wear somewhere around their waists. Hers looked like a nylon net donut floating around her middle. Besides all the equipment I listed above, Cynthia wore rouge, which is old-fashioned word for blush, and eye makeup and lipstick and a tiara. So this would be kind of weird for a girl that's in 5th grade to wear at this point. So because, girls back then didn't wear makeup. You don't wear it until you get older. She looked glamorous, but I could tell that she felt plenty chilly in that costume. This is October. Her teeth were chattering. She wouldn't even put on a sweater. As we were standing in the hall waiting for our turn to go to the auditorium, and as Jennifer's class passed, Cynthia was turned around talking to Dolores. Dolores was dressed as a pilgrim. They were both whispering and giggling, probably about Jennifer. Here's what Jennifer did. As she passed Cynthia, she reached out and, quicker than a blink, unsnapped the tutu. So this, again, remember this picture. So this girl's wearing this tutu here. And so this right here, that's the tutu. And so I guess it has a little thing that flips on. So she unsnaps it. So she just leotard. We probably wouldn't think much of that right now because people wear leotards all the time. You generally don't wear them when you're going out. So, but back then, that'd be like wearing like pantyhose, and that's all almost. Or people would feel like that. It's just too uncovering. So, or it doesn't cover the body weight it should. So she did it so fast. So Jennifer literally just unsnaps the tutu. Okay, I happen to be watching her closely, but even I didn't believe she'd really done it. Jennifer clopped along a line with her eyes still up toward the ceiling and passed me a note almost without my knowing. She did it so fast, I wasn't even sure she did it before I felt the note in my hand and I crunched it beneath my apron to hide it. Jennifer never took her eyes off the ceiling or broke out of line for even half a step. She just like this, just half looking up, not looking at anybody. But she reaches out, unsnaps it really quick, reaches over, gives the other girl a note, and keeps walking. And she's got those big shoes on where they're really loose. I wanted to make sure that everyone saw Cynthia with the tutu down. So I pointed my finger at her and said, ooh! I said it loud. Of course, that made everybody on both sides of the aisle notice her and start to giggle. Cynthia didn't even have the sense enough to be embarrassed. She loved attention so much she didn't care if her tutu had fallen. She stepped with it, picked it up, shook it out, floated it around her head, and anchored it back around her waist. She touched her hands to her hair, giving it little pushes the way women do who've just come out of the beauty parlor. I hope she was itchy. Finally, our class got to the auditorium. After I sat down, I opened the note, holding both my hands under my pilgrim apron. I slowly slipped my hands out and glanced at the note. I was amazed at what I saw. Jennifer's note looked like this. So see that writing? That is really, really different writing. That's the kind of writing you actually need, like a pen that does calligraphy or one of those quill tip pens, or feather quill pens, So, and it says, meet for trick or treat at half after 6 p.m. o'clock of this evening. They're even doing the S's the way the old-fashioned kind of pilgrims did. By the same tree, bring number two bags. Those were good cookies. Again, if you can't tell, this is cursive, but they're using the cursive letter S from the old style because that's not the way cursive S looks anymore. I studied the note a long time. I thought about the note as I watched the Halloween parade. I wondered if Jennifer used a quill pen. You can guess that I didn't win any prizes for my costume. Neither did Cynthia. Neither did Jennifer, although I really thought she should have. We all marched across the stage wearing our masks and stopped for a curtsy or a bow, depending on whether you were a girl or a boy, in front of the judges who were sitting at a table in the middle of the stage. Curtsies where you take the very edges of your dress as a girl and you kind of dip down a little bit, and that's all. And then a bow is just where you put your hand in front of your boy, you bow straight forward, and that's that. So we all marched across the stage wearing our masks and stopped for a curtsy or bow, depending on whether you're a girl or a boy, in front of the judges who were sitting at a table in the middle of the stage. Some of the girls who were disguised as boys forgot themselves and curtsied. Then we marched off. Our class was still seated when Jennifer clopped across the stage in those crazy pilgrim slippers. She didn't wear a mask at all. She wore a big brown paper bag over her head, and there were no holes cut out for her eyes. Yet she walked up the stairs, across the stage, stopped and curtsied in front of the judges, and walked off without tripping or falling or walking out of those gigantic shoes. That is what she looks like. Now, there's chapter 2 is next, but there is no way that girl can do that. So I will stop doing this for now because that's chapter 1. And later on, I know maybe you guys are going to have some questions about this. So feel free if you want to ask any questions you want, because there are some things on this book. Since this is a much older book, in fact, I think the publishing date for this original copy here, I want to say it's like older than me because I was born in 1969. Yep, this was published in 1967. So by the time I was hearing this book was already 10 years old. So if you want to hear some more about this later, fine. You can put some questions in the comments. Till then, I will check you guys out later, and I'll be reading chapter 2 next. So bye.